Throughout history, there have been ways of dying so horrific, so unimaginable, that even the bravest souls would shudder at the thought. But the worst part? They were all real. These aren't just tales from the pages of fiction, they are true accounts of the darkest, most brutal forms of execution ever conceived. You may think you know death, but what if I told you that what awaits in history's darkest corners is far worse than you ever imagined? Prepare yourself for the 10 most horrifying ways to die in history. And trust me, you'll wish you hadn't. The North Sea, a place of wild beauty and unforgiving brutality. Here, the Vikings carried out one of the most fearsome executions, the Blood Eagle. A dark, ritualistic horror for the most treacherous. The victim was bound, their ribs torn from their spine, their lungs pulled outward, flapping like wings. The agony lasted as blood poured out. Performed publicly, it was a reminder of betrayal. The Blood Eagle ensured the soul would never find peace. Now we step into the depths of brutality. Sawing was one of the most horrifying forms of execution. Imagine being hoisted upside down while the executioner saws you in half. The process began at the groin, cutting through your body. Each pull of the saw felt like an eternity. The pain, the blood, the screams, they lasted far too long. You would be alive, fully conscious for every moment. There was no escape, just the slow crawl towards death. Now, if you think you've heard it all, think again. This one is beyond anything you could imagine. Scaphism was a horrifying form of execution in ancient Persia. The condemned were placed in a boat, covered in honey and milk. Insects would swarm, feeding on their flesh. A slow, agonizing death by insects. Can you imagine the horror? Chapter 4. Death on a Cross. Crucifixion. The mere word sends a shiver down your spine, doesn't it? Reserved for traitors and criminals, this wasn't just an execution, it was a slow, torturous dance with death. The victim was nailed to a cross, their weight hanging from their hands, each breath a struggle. They would suffocate, fight for air, until finally, exhaustion claimed them. The crucifixion wasn't meant to be a quick death, it was designed to break a person's spirit, forcing them to endure every moment of their agony until the very end. Chapter 5. The Iron Maiden. The Iron Maiden. It sounds like something out of a bad dream, doesn't it? But this was no nightmare. It was a very real, very terrifying form of torture. The victim was sealed inside a metal coffin, their body surrounded by spikes. The catch? The spikes weren't meant to kill immediately. No. They were there to cause pain, to prolong the suffering. The victim would slowly bleed, each second feeling like eternity. The worst part? They couldn't die fast enough to escape the pain. Chapter 6. Drowning without water. The water torture of the Inquisition wasn't about drowning, it was about terror. Victims were strapped down and had water poured into their throat, suffocating them just before death could claim them. Then, when they were nearly gone, the cycle would begin again, over and over. It wasn't just torture. It was designed to break the mind. A torment where death was constantly promised, but always just out of reach. If you think hanging is a quick death, think again. Hanging, drawing, and quartering was reserved for the worst criminals in medieval England, those who dared to challenge the crown. First, they were hanged until almost dead, then revived. And it only got worse from there. They were disemboweled, their organs torn out before being chopped into 4 pieces, each limb displayed as a gruesome warning. The horror wasn't just in the act, but in the fact that death came slowly, painfully slow. A fate that kept them clinging to life long enough to feel every excruciating moment. Now we step into the ancient world where torture was an art, and the brazen bull was one of its most horrifically creative masterpieces. The condemned would be locked inside a massive bronze bull. But it wasn't just the searing heat that made this execution so monstrous. No, As the fire burned below, the bull's hollow body would amplify the victim's screams, turning them into a distorted, haunting symphony. Can you imagine the terror as you burn alive, knowing that your screams will be heard as music to your executioners? Now this one is enough to make your skin crawl. Death by rats wasn't just an execution, it was a nightmare made real. Imagine being trapped in a small dark space, helpless, with hungry rats gnawing at your flesh. In ancient Rome, this was a terrifying reality for those unlucky enough to fall into the hands of the authorities. And if that wasn't enough, the worst part? The rats would start at the face, the eyes, and continue until there was nothing left but bone and blood. A fate that wasn't swift but drawn out in the most grotesque way possible. Imagine this. You're bound to a giant wheel, limbs shattered, your screams echoing through a cold, unforgiving crowd. This was the fate of countless victims during medieval times. The breaking wheel was designed not for mercy, but for maximum suffering. The victims' bones were broken, their body left to hang in agony as the world watched in horror. And the worst part? Sometimes they weren't killed right away. They were left there, tortured, exposed, until death claimed them. A slow, unrelenting end that was the true purpose of the breaking wheel. We've journeyed through the darkest corners of history, explored the depths of human cruelty, and witnessed the most horrifying ways to die. But the story doesn't end here. There are countless other tales of suffering and torment hidden within the annals of time. If these interested you and you want to see more, make sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date with new content.